It's been weeks that Israel is torn between opponents and supporters of the government's judicial plan. According to its supporters, it will rebalance the power between the legislative and judicial entities. According to its opponents, the plan will lead to weakening the country's judicial system. We are here with Barak Medina, professor of law at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and one of the major experts in Israeli constitutional law. Barak Medina, in a recent article of yours, you're stating that if the attempts of amending the state's constitutional legislation succeed, it will result in practically eliminating judicial independence. To understand the possible threat to democracy, could you first explain to us what exactly the reform is about?
The reform indeed is aimed at minimizing the scope of judicial review. Currently, the Supreme Court has the power to review legislation of the Knesset based on basic laws that are somewhat in the status of constitution. What the current coalition is trying to do is to remove the power of judicial review. They want to do that by first ruling that the Knesset can override decisions of the court. When the court invalidate specific legislation, the Knesset can override it and return it to power to be effective, and additional measures. But most importantly, the most important measure in this respect, that the idea is to change the way judges are appointed such that the ruling coalition will have the sole power to appoint judges. So these two steps, to have the override power and to appoint judges, is expected to result in effectively removing the power of judicial review.
And to go deeper on these judge appointments, now they're appointed by a committee that includes equal representation for politicians, lawyers, and sitting judges. Today, it won't be the same. Can you explain to us what will be the appointment structure?
Yeah, currently, both the representatives of the Supreme Court, 3 justices, and the government, the Justice Minister, both of them have a veto power. So you cannot appoint someone to the court without an agreement of both sides. So usually they do package deals. They appoint 2 persons, one of each side or something like that. And it results in a balanced composition of the court. Now the proposition is that the government will have the power to appoint justices without the agreement of the justices. So you cannot appoint justices without the approval of the ruling coalition, but you don't need an agreement of the other side or the justices. It's not another side. It's just trying to make sure that the appointments are right from the perspective of, professionality and other aspects. But the main reason here is that the current coalition views the court as a liberal or leftist or something that represents a specific political view. And they suggest that, well, it's improper that when the left is in power, they have the power to appoint justices as they like, because both left and the justices agree. And when the right wing is in power, they have to reach compromises. Of course, this representation is wrong. The justices do not represent any specific political view unless you refer to the commitment to respect human rights as a political bias. But as long as we do not agree with this perspective, the result might be a court that is not committed to the values of liberalism.
So, Barak Medina, it concerns the judges of the Supreme Court, but also regular judges.
Yes. Well, we do not have in Israel a separate court, a constitutional court or something like that. The court that employs judicial review is the Supreme Court, which also sits as a court of appeal, like in Great Britain or in the United States, unlike in France or in Europe. We do not have a separate system of administrative court, thing like that. So the appointment by this committee is for all judges, both judges in lower courts and in the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Israel is a country without a constitution. The laws that come the closest to it are the basic laws, which are a working draft for a future constitution that hasn't been drafted yet. Recently, you offered, among other experts, an alternative to a new constitution to change the formal status of the Declaration of Independence. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, well, we should take a step back for a second and just say what we are talking about. We are not talking about, currently in Israel, about issues of separation of powers. Who should be in charge? The government, the parliament, the Supreme Court. It is not about that. It's a debate about values, about commitment to respect human rights. The whole idea of the current coalition is to have the power to legislate policies that are currently unconstitutional, to take measures that infringe human rights without proper justification. So this is the debate about policies. And the idea is that what is needed nowadays is not just finding a compromise about the correct scope of judicial review, what should be the powers of this court or that court, or something like that. The compromise that is needed is about values, about specific policies. What should be the role of religion in public sphere? What should be the commitment to equality given the definition of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state? And these kind of substantial aspects. And we believe that in order to find a solution about the correct scope of judicial review, we must first agree on values. And because it's very difficult nowadays in Israel to reach an agreement, to agree on all these debates about the occupied territories, about equality, about freedom of speech and things like that, people have different views. The second best is to refer to this document that is called the Declaration of Independence. Israel's Declaration of Independence, somewhat like you would refer to France Declaration of Human Rights back at the French Revolution, is a document that enjoys popular support. There is a consensus around this document. So instead of trying to reach an agreement on a new constitution, we can simply take this draft, this declaration that was accepted when Israel was established, and make it a constitution. And I think this will help us find a compromise regarding the specific debate about the scope of judicial review.
And do you think you could have the public support on such a proposal?
Yeah, I'm confident that there is a very strong public support on this proposal. What is not clear is whether the current government will be willing to accept it, because this declaration includes a commitment to equality, to respect human rights and things like that. And I hope that it will serve as a basis for compromise, yes.
So for our audience to understand a bit better how Israel's judiciary system works and how the laws are defined, can you explain to us a little bit more in more details what is a basic law, who creates the basic law, and how can we legislate the system?
Okay. Well, when Israel was established, as I said, the Declaration of Independence stated that there will be a written constitution. So there was a decision there that a constitutional assembly will be elected. This assembly will draft a constitution and it will be approved. And indeed, the constitutional assembly was elected. However, they had difficulties in reaching an agreement about the constitution. And therefore, they made two decisions. First, the Constitutional Assembly decided that it will serve as a regular parliament. instead of a constitutional assembly. And second, as you said, that the constitution will be drafted chapter by chapter. Each chapter is called basic law, and once we have all required chapters, they will be formed together for a constitution. However, it was not decided, it left undecided two aspects. First, what is the status of each chapter of this basic law once it is enacted? Is it just a draft, or is it something that has power? And what is the required procedure? What is the required majority to enact basic laws? Over the years, the Knesset enacted several, something like 14 basic laws, these chapters of the Constitution. And most of them were enacted, or almost all of them were enacted in a consensus after a long debate, several years, coalition and opposition together, and each chapter was enacted. And based on this practice, the court ruled about 30 years ago that each of these chapters, the basic laws, have a constitutional status. It is not the constitution, but it's a constitutional legislation. It has the power to restrain the government. If the government acts against basic laws, the court has the power to invalidate legislation and other decisions of government. The change nowadays is that the current coalition tries to change these basic laws to say that the government will not be limited anymore by the requirement to respect human rights, or that the court will have power for judicial review. And they want to do that in a basic law that will be enacted by the coalition only, without a consensus, without this tradition of forming a consensus around forming or amending, changing the basic laws. And this is why I believe, and many others believe, that if the Knesset indeed does that, they will change basic laws to make these changes. As I said, the court will rule that these changes are invalid, they are unconstitutional. So the government has the majority in parliament, but they don't have the power to enact these kind of undemocratic changes. The court will invalidate them, the current court, before it is changed. So what we expect is that if the changes are enacted, the court will strike them down, will invalidate them. This understanding is shared by the government itself, and this is why I believe there will be a compromise. They understand that they cannot enact it just by their coalition power. There are all kinds of attempts to reach an agreement. I believe that one way or another there will be an agreement. So all those concerns that this is the end of democracy in Israel, I think, are too early, not in the sense that the proposal is not dangerous. I believe that the proposal, indeed, if enacted as such, will mark the end of democracy in Israel. But first, as I said, it will not be valid. The court will strike it down. And second, I believe that it will not be enacted. There will be some compromise. But we will know in the next few weeks, where we are heading.
So if it's enacted, like when we look at what's going on outside of Israel, like in the US, we have the Supreme Court. In France, we have the Constitutional Court. Does such a system where the legislative has the primacy over the judicial system, an entity, does that exist in another democracy?
Yeah, it's quite unique. There are cases in which the power to amend, to change the constitution is given to the parliament itself. But in all cases, and in almost all cases, this power to change the constitution is required to be in a qualified majority, 2/3 or 3/4, something like that. So even if it's parliament, you cannot do that in regular majority. Israel is unique in this respect, that it's both the power is given to the parliament and in a regular majority. So currently the coalition has very slim majority in the Knesset, and nevertheless, formally speaking, they have the power to change the constitution. But as I said, this is true just formally. When we look at the cases of the Supreme Court, we see that the court already indicated that if the Knesset misuse this power, in the sense that they, in regular majority, make basic changes, important changes that affect the nature of the democracy, the court already indicated that it will rule that the Knesset does not have this power. So formally speaking, it seems as if they have the power, but in practice, they do not have this power. So I think that the concern is right. There are a lot of demonstrations in Israel and concern, but I don't believe that the dangerous is indeed going to materialize.
And talking about the demonstrations, last week, 160,000 people were in the streets. Do you think a popular mobilization can do anything in Israel?
Yeah, I'm confident about it. Well, it's a combination of many forces. There is the economic pressure, the economic elite in Israel, the high-tech sector. Many of the leaders of the economy are against the government in this respect. And there is a real threat to the economic stability of Israel if indeed they realize their threat. There is a threat to relocate, to take the high-tech industry from Israel to another country. There is even an initiative to negotiate with several countries to accept the high-tech industry, Israeli high-tech industry there. There is the pressure that comes from the international community, mostly from the EU and from the United States, and it does have an effect on the Israeli government, the international pressure. There is this pressure from just the general population. What's interesting is that you do not see practically nothing, any counter-demonstration. You do not see any popular support in the streets or in the media in the government plan. There is even the supporters of the coalition, most of them in the polls say that they oppose this proposal. So given all these aspects and the idea that the Supreme Court is likely to invalidate the changes, it seems very unlikely that the government will have the power to enact this proposal.
Barak Medina, thank you. Thanks for your time and for explaining to us in such simple words the Israeli system.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.